Hello and welcome to the interview. I'm Kim Min-jung. North Korea continues to make headlines around the globe, but it remains elusive to most around the world because of the lack of access. Well, I'm at an exhibition that gives a very vivid glimpse into the hermit nation. We'll find out more on this edition of the interview. In less than 1 year since their last summit, U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un have come to the dialogue table once again. Though the Hanoi summit last month failed to produce an agreement, it certainly put North Korea back in the spotlight. For a long while, North Korea remained an uncharted territory for most of the world. Only recently, with a renewed era of reconciliation on the Korean peninsula, have so many come to take such an interest in the communist state. Nikolásbonor's exhibition of his own collection of North Korean memorabilia is one way of answering at least some of those questions about the Hermit Kingdom. Born in the UK, Bonner has been visiting North Korea for the last 26 years since he founded Koryo Tour, a specialist tour operator for North Korea. He may well be one of the few outsiders who have a close understanding of the real lives of real North Korean people. Through his tour business, Bonner has offered himself as the link between North Koreans and the rest of the world. Making the film Comrade Kim Goes Flying, a joint production with North Korea, the United Kingdom, and Belgium, was one such way of showing North Korea to the outside world. Here's a man who is an entrepreneur, film director, and an expert on one of the most reclusive nations in the world. The interview meets with Nikolásbono to hear his stories from North Korea. Welcome to the interview. Great to have you on our show.
Thank you very much.
We're at the exhibition titled Made in North Korea, Graphics from Everyday Life in the DPRK. Now, I had expected to be a lot gloomy and darker, but it's very vivid and colorful. Tell us more about the exhibition to begin with.
The exhibition it's a collection of basically ephemera that I've picked up since traveling to the north since 1993. And it was initially started, I think, from a sugar packet on flying in on Air Koryo. And I expected to get a sort of, I got my coffee and then this sugar packet, and normally other Soviet areas you get just sugar on it, but this was highly decorated and very beautifully, very sort of frivolous, and you don't associate frivolous with North Korea. And so that was the start of the first collection. And then over my subsequent visits, which have been probably almost every month, the rubbish grew, if you like, and then it became it was seen by this publishers, and they turned it into a sort of a collection. So now it's not a box of rubbish; it's now a sort of catalogued collection.
Sure, almost like an art exhibition.
It is, and like you say, you from North Korea, we know the propaganda. We're aware of that sort of art, this sort of quite severe stuff, and then you flip over when you hit sort of products that they make that are actually very gentle and very, there's things you wash your hair with, the chocolate box you give your granny, that stuff is decorated and it's not propaganda. Wow, interesting. It's very pop artsy too. Why do you think that is? I think the colours that we don't have, certainly in the West, we would never put purples and greens together like they do. And this is products for the people, so it's not the propaganda work that we associate with it. It's products that people want to pick up, and it's the basic stuff from the merchandise is. It's not like advertising, they call it promotion, so it tells you this is a bottle of water, inside there is water. It's not like drink this water, you'll look beautiful, your girls will fall in love with you, etc. It's very practical, but at the same time it's highly decorative, and that's the pop sort of part of it.
But if you think about it, it's not capitalist society, North Korea, right?
No, but it's still a society with choice. For example, there's not just one cigarette, there's not just one beer. There's a choice, and they distinguish themselves in the old days not to be competitive, but to say, look, we are different. This is what we provide. So the construction cigarette is for construction workers. There's a sort of cigarette favoured by the military, or people have a certain choice. If you're from Pyeongseong, you'll prefer Pyongyang beer, as opposed to if you're from Pyongyang, you'll have, drink a sort of a bottle of Taedonggang beer. So it's not capitalist, but certainly there is choice.
Sure, interesting. You also run a tour company, like you mentioned, Koryo Tours, that operates tours to North Korea. Tell us about how all of this began.
Yeah, it was a friend of myself and Josh. We were in Beijing, and he had a North Korean friend who he'd studied Chinese with, and this chap went back to Pyongyang and said, look, can you help us? We've got nobody. I'm in the tourism business. I've got nobody coming. So we put together a group of 10 people and we went over.
When was this?
This is 1993.
Wow.
And so there's pretty close to, great big changes in the world that happened in '89. And North Korea, basically tourism, they'd opened up to Western tourists in '87, '88, but no one was coming. So we started up tourism, and I then found it fascinating. I trained as a landscape architect, and I found it fascinating from an architecture point of view, and then wanted to go back. And the only way to go back was to get another visa as a tourist. And so to make it affordable, we set up a tour company.
Wow.
And now we take about almost 2,000 people a year, but there's only 4,000 visiting a year, so it's not busy.
It's not busy, but
No.
it's growing?
No, it's not growing. It's staying quite steady. It grew a lot when I think people want to now, when they travel, they want to see for their own eyes. It's that sort of crowd we get. It's not people who want to go, to Ibiza or lying on the beach or what have you. It's an experience. It's certainly a holiday. You take a holiday to go on it, but it's more of an experience.
So this exhibition is the second installment following the first one in London, I believe. Tell us about how that exhibition was
received. The whole thing happened from basically this collection of rubbish that I'd got as my partner. She said, "Look, are we getting rid of this?" Because it was taking a large part of the house. And I put it together in a sort of form of a book, and I sent it to a friend who actually sent it to a publisher without me knowing, which is great. And they said, "We want to turn it into a book," and it's a fantastic publisher. And then House of Illustration specifically looked at this and said, this is going to be a great exhibition, and they put it on there. I suppose in the UK the interest is partly North Korea, but also partly because of the graphic image, and the image that these North Koreans are creating is of world standard, so it has an interest for illustrators. And then of course the other interest is just, wow, it's North Korea, and we can never get enough. It's fascinating,
right? That mysterious, the mystery factor, right?
I think so, and even more remarkable here because being in Seoul and knowing I've travel to both north and south, the limitations of what is allowed to be shown here. So this is quite remarkable. I mean, especially when you think a year ago, not a chance on earth of seeing anything like this. And here we have an exhibition, open to the public. It's incredible.
Tell us about the Seoul exhibition, and also I'm sure you've had some restrictions that were imposed on making sure.
Actually, no. I mean, the restrictions that the Culture and I, who are the company that sort of brought this over, they had were quite obvious ones. It was certain things that referred to the Korean War, like a comic on the Korean War or a postcard on that. So very limited, and that's because it will cause offence to the people in the South. But no, actually, everything's got through here. There's just been a very small, just restriction of just a few objects. The biggest shock is that all this stuff is here now and available for public to see.
And this exhibition is titled Made in Chosun. What does it mean? Why did you name it? The
North Koreans prefer their country to be called the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. That can't happen here. Chosun is acceptable, and it is stuff made in the north and designed in the north. So I think it gives enough an indication of what for both sides to happy. It's always a difficult game playing, you know, especially if you're taking stuff from the north anywhere, and particularly when you're taking it to the south.
Now you have more than 10,000 pieces of North Korean collection, I believe, and this exhibition showcases about 200. How did you narrow them down to the final 200?
Yeah. And I suppose what's interesting is that every piece in there is something that I've handled at some time. It's not bought off eBay, or so if there's invitations, it's because I was invited to that. So it's like a diary of personal notes. There's we made a film on the two girls in the mass games, and one of the tickets I've got, it's not a great graphic, but it's the graphic of that ticket to see them perform their event after training for a year. So it's very personal. I suppose it's also ethnologically interesting. You know, you're looking at a society sort of behind the stuff. So pieces were chosen for the aesthetics, because they mean a lot to me personally, and also because they give an indication to someone else not understanding Korea what it's about, whether it be, you know, this is decorated with the Kumgang Mountains that represent health and happiness, or this is the steel works that represents the movement, the Cholima movement of the rebuilding of the country. So it's got all sort of three layers in there, and we just chose, yeah, it's just one of those difficult decisions, like chopping things out and keeping certain things in.
Did you invest heavily financially also in your collection?
No, there's no. I mean, the flight to get into Pyongyang. But I mean, I didn't go looking for this stuff. I didn't take a flight saying, right, today I'm going to fill a whole case. It's stuff that literally, this is 25 years of collecting. So it's slowly, bit by bit. There's the individual value of the most expensive piece is very, very low, I would imagine.
Now, what is your most prized collection, if you could choose one?
It's again, I think it's that sugar packet that I picked up. It's just that's the thing that started it. I used to be a countryside ranger looking after sort of before I became a landscape architect, before I ended up being in North Korea of all things. But if you took kids on a walk, at the end of the day of the walk, they'd all have stones or little, you know, they'd find something. So it's an instinct, I think, that we have to pick things up. We've all done it. Mine, I suppose, I just kept on collecting, partly because of the graphic, partly because of the memory, and it just ended up as a lot of stuff. So they all have a certain value to me. There isn't one piece that I did lose a piece once, and I wanted it for this exhibition, and I've refound it, and that was annoying. So there's a lot of passion. It was just if I'd lost any of those pieces, I know them, it's a bit sad, you know. But if I'd be looking for it, because there's also no digital collection. So if you want to look up North Korean graphics, if you haven't got them in their physical form, you're not going to find them on the internet.
I see.
So that's also another thing, is this stuff has also been lost probably a lot in the north. They don't keep onto stuff that much.
What have you noticed about graphic design in North Korea? What more can you tell us about?
I think, I mean, of all the most boring subjects in the world, you know, if you're not an illustrator, you think, oh God, why am I coming? But it is fascinating. I think the things it tells us, one is the stories behind the objects are amazing, whether it be the propaganda posters or why something is designed in this way or what. But as a designer, it's the colours. They're very distinctive Korean colours. It's the calligraphy. It's there also reference to historical pieces, whether it be the white tiger or the decoration that you have in architecture that appears on objects. These graphics are imbued with North Koreanness. If it's a building such as on the cigarettes, there's a building of the Grand People's Study House on Kim Il-sung Square, that to a Korean is, wow, this is an important object. If it's got a cigarette, if it's a matchbox with the steelworks on it, that represents strength, you know, the rebuilding of the country. So everything is imbued with a lot more than just the image. To us in the West, an image is, oh, it's nice, throw it away. To the North Koreans, that really does mean something.
Symbols?
Very symbolic, yeah. I mean, and also the traditional symbols of cranes, tortoises, etc. That you all have because you're Korean.
Right.
So it's a good mix. It's when you put it all together, you realise, you know, it is not just a collection of stuff I've put in boxes. It actually is an opening into understanding a society.
Sure. How do you think it compares to the international standard, if you will?
For hand-drawn graphics, they're exceptional. And they are stunning. I mean, we would call them sort of retro now. And in fact, the whole of this collection is, the majority of the stuff is pre-2005. When we started having digital cameras, North Koreans caught on pretty quickly. They did the same. They got digital printing soon after us. And so nowadays, the stuff they produce is very homogeneous. It just looks like washing powder you would find, whether it be in Seoul or in London or where have you. But the hand-drawn graphics, they've got a story and a personality. But everything else now, since 2000, since both digitalization and new stuff coming in from the outside, so washing powders coming in from the West or from China, North Korea had to up their game, and they were sort of competing. So their packaging is now of an equal standard, but it's this rather dull, you know, sort of happy, smelly flower people, as opposed to really funky.
So all of this would be unique even to Koreans, you were saying? Because now, in this day and age, everything looks pretty much...
Yeah, so products now for a North Korean, the modern products created in the country are very similar to products created in China, South Korea, and the rest of the world. They're shiny, sort of, you know, attractive, modern. They make North Koreans feel, wow, this is cool. They wouldn't want to buy that old, that would be retro packaging. They wouldn't want it. But I took this book, I showed a North Korean friend the book, and they went, why have you done this? Why have you collected this stuff? And then they started going, oh, I used to take my granny this, or my father used to smoke these cigarettes. So suddenly this nostalgia comes out, and you basically, they're looking at the book and they're going through something like you would of your youth. Sure. And that's where it's more, because these products are no longer available in the North.
I see, interesting. So over the long period that you've been traveling to and from North Korea and collecting things from the country, I'm sure you've noticed changes, not just in computer graphics and the designs, but in everyday people's lives and their attitudes. What are some of the most notable changes that you've witnessed and felt? Yeah,
the biggest change regards sort of thought process was probably 2000 under Kim Dae-jung, was with suddenly South Korea not being the big enemy, but actually just being, you know, we are Koreans. So that had a significant impact. But on the actual and the physical changes in the country, people's attitudes have changed. Attitudes towards women. You now see men holding women's hands, men pushing the baby.
Interesting.
And that was a lot influenced by TV coming in. They do sort of TV series. We made a film, Comrade Kim Goes Flying, about girl power. So that had a big impact, showing that, you know, girls don't need to listen to, they can slightly go against the male prerogative. And so yeah, slowly little bits of changes, but not something not something that would leap out. It's more being very gradual. Sure. If you had a street map of Pyongyang in '93, it would work just as well as it, you know, today. I see. What message, if any, did you want to deliver by holding this exhibition? There's no message, but there is. I don't like the way the world views in anything something black and white. That's a pretty ignorant sort of way to look at anything. So I think if people can be informed and it's up to them, then that should be available. And so it's up to you. You can come away and take away from this, oh, I didn't realize such and such, or it's not going to change your opinion of North Korea, but it will give you some more information. The new exhibition, Made in North Korea, traveled to Seoul after a successful run in London. It's the first exhibition of North Korea's graphic design and shows items from the 1970s to the early 2000s. It's a collection neither of a North Korean or a South Korean, but of a British man, a truly third-party view of the life in North Korea. As you enter the exhibition, you'll be first struck by those commanding propaganda posters. The ones on display are all hand-painted, mostly carrying messages to encourage production in agriculture, fishery, and mining. Rather direct wordings are combined with bold colors, forming that characteristic North Korean style of mass messaging.
Like many other nations, North Korea too issues commemorative postcards, stamps, and tickets for special occasions of national significance. Carrying messages of national pride, these pieces often show their heritage sites and sometimes dynamic movements, if for sporting events. While the content may be a little more than ordinary, North Korea's food packaging has much to say for itself. There are little expressions of emotions. Packaging is rather to the point, delivering solid information about the ingredients or flavors with realistic images and text. These are no fine arts, but they do provide a fascinating glimpse into the ordinary lives in North Korea. It's an opportunity to take a peek and see that there too is life in the communist state. You're not only a businessman and collector, you're also an artist, and you've directed many films as well.
I'm a businessman. I'm a terrible businessman. But yeah.
Tell us about some of the
films.
works.
Yeah,
yes.
the films were... We started, the first probably film we made was in the early 90s. It was the first travel show in North Korea. And then a friend came to me and he said, I want to do a story on the North Korean football team. And it's the story of the 1966 team who went to England and created the greatest shock in World Cup history. They beat the Italians 1-0. My partner, she's Italian, and the whole family never have forgiven me. And then South Korea beat them as well. So it's football. That was an amazing story. We thought we'd meet one or two of the football players, but in fact we met the majority of them, and we ended up taking them back to the UK and back to the place of their victory, and they got a standing ovation. It was beautiful. And they were great characters. And then,
this is a documentary.
Yeah, a documentary, and it was with the BBC. And then we said we'll never make another film because documentaries are hard work. But we did. We then made A State of Mind, following two girls in the mass games. The mass games is 100,000 people in a floor show, and the biggest picture in the world. This pixelated.
Right.
Books with 150 pages in them. And
spectacular.
Spectacular, but for a lot of people very daunting. Like, what is it like to be an individual? Is it cruel? Are they forced? So we wanted to film and see what it was like for one of the individuals, one of the girls, and we followed two girls.
How young?
They were, at the time it was 9 and 12, I think, Hyung-sun and...
very young.
Yeah, and it was fascinating. That was filmed over a year. And then the last sort of big documentary perhaps was the one on the American defectors, who left here in the 60s, crossed the border, very dangerous, as you can imagine, and living in North Korea. Two of them were still alive at the time we were filming. And then I've made, and after that I started making a romantic comedy, and we've done a couple of other documentaries, and we've taken Michael Palin, who's a well-known sort of travel expert around North Korea as well. That was the last one a couple of months ago. So yeah, in between film projects, it's pretty busy. Of
the films you mentioned, what were some of the most challenging, and what's your favorite?
The stories, I mean, they're enormous, but perhaps the most interesting one was when we started our first film. We were filming on one of the electric buses. They have a sort of tram, and it was full of old people. And this guy started, one of the North Korean producers started taking off all the old people. And I said, "What are you doing? This is the colour. This is the bus will be empty, and it's just full of young people." And he said, "Well, if you film this, you're just filming our old people to make us look like we're decrepit." I thought that's ridiculous. And Dan and I, the director, just looked at each other. But our sound man said to them, "Aren't you proud of you Korean people who fought for you and built your country?" And there was silence. And then all the people were shoved back on the bus. And so it's stories like that. It's trying to work with, it's working with people, trying to find a language that you both understand, understanding that there are limitations they have and there are things that we want. So where can you draw the line? So it's a lot of pushing and a lot of amazing individuals.
Sounds like they're very concerned about the way they're portrayed.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, when you say we're going to do a story, for example, on the mass games, we only want to feature the girls and the mass games. We're not asking about the human rights issues, etc. So, in fact, once they understand that, then fine. There's nothing to open. There's nothing there that they're hiding. It's just a lot of hard training on the girls and you know, hearing out how they react. So they will understand. Yeah, there are certain things that you definitely cannot cross into, but you can push, and every sort of film we have done. And what's remarkable is the Koreans we work with, they're the ones that have made the film so good because they've understood. They're filmmakers.
The North Koreans.
Yeah, I think people, when we made the feature film, people tend to forget that you know, they are the people we're making films with. They want to make a good film. It may be a propaganda film for them, but they've always wanted to make a good propaganda film. So when we're asking for a film that's a comedy, they will do their best. The set designers want to do good set design. It's not just an authoritarian approach that we tend to think. It's people have individual pride there
and professionalism. Sounds like.
Totally.
And your movie also titled "Comrade Kim Goes Flying" had some great reviews as well. Yeah,
that was good. That was shown in, all the films actually been shown in Busan. So that is remarkable. And Comrade Kim was the first feature film to be shown in North Korea to the public. And that is really something. It was also at Toronto, so it got a good world audience. It was a fun film. It was the story of a coal miner who wants to become a trapeze artist. So we had to find either an actress and teach her to become a trapeze artist, or a trapeze artist and train her to become an actress. And we did the latter. It was fun. With an amazing girl, Han Jong-sim, and immediately she'd actually never got married because people couldn't see her. She's always 30 meters up in the air. But then someone saw the film, saw how beautiful she was, waited outside the circus for her, and a year later she's got a baby.
Oh, wow.
So
what a great
films
story.
are magical. Yeah.
엄마, 비둘기는 어떻게 하늘을 나나?
그건 날개가 있기 때문이란다.
물찬 제비 같거든.
And this movie was the result of collaborative efforts from the UK, Belgium, I believe, and also North Korea. How did you also get involved in this process?
Well, I came up with the general sort of I mean, it was the three of us sitting down with the general idea of let's make a story, and what story would it be? It would have to be the circus because it's fun, and then you want someone to achieve something. Then let's get someone from underground who's actually scared of heights, wanting to become a trapeze artist. So I would go with the first script to the producer in North Korea, and we would sort of write it out. Then we'd bring in our friend Anya, who's a proper filmmaker, and it would develop, and then we'd all meet in Pyongyang for a coffee and go through the script, and eventually we had a script. But no one wanted to make it because it wasn't a North Korean trope. It wasn't a typical North Korean film. Eventually, there was a lovely story that she left the script, the lady we were, North Korean woman. Everyone had refused to make the film in North Korea, but she left the script with the doorman, and the doorman would show it to people, particularly in winter when it's so cold. People come to get warmed, and they'd read the script and say, this is a great story. And so she tried again, said, look, people like it, we want to make it, and it was made.
And this movie involved a North Korean producer, like you said, and a North Korean actress, sounds like. And so how was it, and it was filmed in North Korea as well?
Total North Korean,
Right, sort of, so how was it working with all these factors? That
I mean, I was on set all the time, and I've done, and I was by that time quite experienced in documentaries, but not feature film. So I came on as like the new boy, and you could see them all look at me going, he's the idiot with the money, you know, he doesn't know anything. But over the time, over the shoot, over the sort of 2 months, you know, it was actually, you know, I think, I always like to believe you do, but I gained some respect. In the end, I had a fantastic after party, you know, after the film was made, and actually after the premiere in Pyongyang. And yeah, I still keep in touch with them all now. They're great.
How is it working with the North Koreans? I'm just guessing it must be a little bit different because of the cultural differences.
But you soon get over the cultural differences. I mean, you know where the limitations are. You don't go into politics, and you're very careful with what questions you ask. But if it's making a film about a girl, you know, wanting to, you know, it's a story of how she meets the boy, it's going to be the same story in the North as it with us. There'll be slight differences in humour and things, but actually, you know, they have comedies. They know how to do humour better than I do, but it just took a little bit of I mean, it was between myself and the director and Anya. It was a fight, no doubt, but it was a fight for a girl who didn't exist. What would she do in this situation? And that is a story that you have, you know, in filmmaking everywhere. You're trying to make your protagonist alive, someone who doesn't exist, and you all have different ways of doing that.
And this movie was broadcast in North Korea in 2016.
No, it's their most popular film. It's great. It's up on all the billboards. Yeah, 2012 it was you know, shown in throughout, and it was then I think broadcast throughout the country. And now he's there. Do you have any idea how it was received? Yeah, lots. You know, people, you know, I mean, everyone knows it. It's, you know, it was there. It was a film. Yeah, I think. I mean, the thing with cinema, it's like our film. We had our film shown in North Korea, and it was shown to, you know, 100% of the population, because at that time there was only one TV. So it's great, and the film, you know, has gone around the country, because there's, you know, the cinema, there's only going to be 1 or 2 films out each year that are going to be taken around there. But yeah, the questions they asked were, there's a part where she changes into these beautiful shoes, and the audience asked, a lot of people say, are those shoes hers, or were they prop? And you think, where did that question come from? But then there's also the same questions is, you know, before we made the film, the people at the girls at the hotel said, look, we're a bit fed up with films having old actors and rather dull. We want someone young. And so, you know, they forced me to sort of make sure that we got young, good-looking actors and actresses. So yeah, the whole thing is a real cooperation.
And did you also have a chance to see many North Korean films while you were there? Yeah,
I've seen a lot of North Korean films. There's a few that are good. There's a few that you think, wow, this sounds amazing, and you might nod off, because they're very, you know, every film before the one we had. Our film was the first film to be called, this is a film allowed for pure public, but for pure entertainment. That's it. Before that, everything had a political message. It was a political trope. So you know, people were there. They were struggling. Even if there were comedies, it was the idea that we're together, a social unit, etc. There's a political message. So this film was the first film allowed just to be made for entertainment.
I see. Interesting.
And it's changed. You know, and it's changed now. The film industry is going through a massive change in North Korea.
Does it come in different genres, like thrillers and
thrillers? No, but mainly sort of revolutionary, anti-revolutionary, against the sort of, you know, people realizing that they're not good enough citizens and realizing the error of their ways. There's a lovely football one called Centre Forward, and the guy always tries to score the goal without passing, and of course he fails. But when he realizes if he plays as part of the team, then we will win.
So that in itself has a political message of sorts as well.
Yeah,
so it hasn't departed entirely.
No, but films being made since our film will be just for entertainment, and we think there will be new genres, but we're about to see. So hold on.
And you also have experiences in other films, Crossing the Line, Aiming High in Creation. Any interesting episodes that you can share with us?
Well, if you're going to meet, you know, I suppose the most interesting one was the American Defectors, because the last thing you expect to meet. I'd always heard that there were American Defectors, and I'd seen them in films from the 80s, but we'd never seen them in real life. And then one day I think it was 2006, I was called in I was actually on the tour, and they said, you know, you're wanted. So, oh God, what's this? And sat in this dark room, and this big North Korean came in and said, hey boy, I hear you want to hear my story, and realized it was Joe Jesnok, who's a big head taller than me, with his badge in a full North Korean, you know, sort of clothing, and it's like meeting Elvis Presley. But if it was Elvis Presley, I could actually probably ask more questions, because I knew his songs, but I didn't know the first thing about this guy. And it turned out he had children.
Back in the States?
No, back in Pyongyang, in North Korea.
Married to a North Korean woman?
No, the whole story goes beyond belief. But those kids now are married to North Koreans, so that's even more remarkable. It's an incredible story. I mean, that story just.
And this is crossing the line.
Yeah. And Aim High in Creation I just helped really with. It was a lovely look into the North Korean film industry. And there's this lovely piece where the director says, I'm making a film, she was making a film, she wanted to do it a propaganda style, and she said, we want to show the world about global warming. Do you know what global warming is? And there's silence, and the director, the North Korean director says, does she think we're from the moon? So beautiful.
That's funny. Is there a film you're working on right now at the moment?
Yeah, there's a couple of projects. One is an animation project. I can't really say very much about that, but there's a great film festival here in South Korea. I hope we can get it. It's a kids animation. Hope we can show it here.
Interesting.
And the plan is, it's animated in the north, but we want to have some involvement here, the post-production in the south. And then I'd like to do another film. Yeah, we've got a documentary that we're just about to start work on. So it's another. I said I'd never make another documentary. Documentaries are tough, but there's always one more.
So you studied landscape architecture at college, so we can safely assume that your career took a sharp
it did. And if you said that the next 25 years of your life is going to be spent in Pyongyang, I'd have looked at you and gone, no bloody way. But there we are. So, but interesting, it goes 4 years ago, 2014. I met up with an architect here, the well-known South Korean architect, and we worked on the Korea Pavilion for the Venice Biennale, and won actually, which is quite remarkable. Wow. So we provided the North Korea section to their work, and that was stunning. So sometimes things have a very long route of getting back to
one in one full circle. Yeah. Now, I want to know how you first developed interest in North Korea. Where did it all begin?
I think. By chance? By chance. I arrived in China to meet my friend Josh, and he'd been working in North Korea for a year with one of these courier companies. In Beijing, we had a friend who was North Korean learning Chinese. I was learning a little bit of Chinese. We'd all mess around playing football. So football was the common sort of theme, I suppose. And then he said, look, why don't you come over to Pyongyang and have a look? So it was all by accident. And then I think the very rough years in the career in the 90s, and that we ended up working with aid organizations, ending up to understand the country better. Then we started making the films. And then there's a lovely story, which is 10 years hard work followed by instant success. And I think it was 10 years of struggle. And then suddenly you find out, wow, we know quite a bit about the country.
Your tour company is now based in Beijing, and you operate tours to North Korea. And I'm sure when you first started, you've had numerous challenges. What were some of them?
I think the challenge is there's no head-on, sort of confrontation, because you're both trying to do a common aim. You're trying to take people into the North Koreans are trying to get people into the country. They do tourism for two reasons. One is money, and also, this is our country. We want to give you a good impression, and it's not far from our aims. That the question is trying to align them so both sides work. When you go on a tour, you're with two guides at all times. The North Koreans want to show you like a route to learn, dung 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 dung, and we want to meet people. And the North Koreans say, no, look at the sites. So that's the biggest difference, is for us as a tour company, making sure that we have an interaction with the Korean people. So we do all sorts of things. We do cookery demonstrations where we, instead of going into a restaurant and just being fed, that you actually help, with the cooking.
Oh, wow.
We do work with all sorts, whether we work with orphanages, etc., so that we get some interaction there. But that's a lot of the work, has been getting them to understand just really what we want and how they can work together. But no, I mean, it's quite remarkable. 25 years in business and we're still going. In any part of the world, that's difficult with tourism, but no, our partners have stood with us, they've worked with us. It's been, it's successful.
Were there any restrictions on, say, for example, Americans trying to get into North Korea following some incidents? No,
I mean, Americans now can't travel to North Korea. That's a ban placed by their own country. But every time you go, you're going to be with 2 guides, so you're going to be very well controlled anyhow. But there's been no case of, with us, we give everyone an hour's briefing before they go to the country, so they understand what the rules are. And we go with them to make sure, we're a team of 12 people in our office, we make sure that we accompany the tours and people behave, really.
Yes, my question would be, how much of these political developments affect what you do?
Number-wise, I mean, numbers are definitely affected when the tensions were high. Especially a year ago, numbers were down. There are certain times, if there's a mass games, people will be tempted to come because it's worth, they'll say, this is worth the risk because it's something so spectacular. But we're definitely party. We fluctuate along with the way the politics goes. But the people we take, it's still a very small percentage of people. I mean, we're taking 2,000 people, and there's always going to be in the world 2,000 inquisitive minds wanting to see something. And I think the more and the more the media portrays not just North Korea but other countries, that may not necessarily be the case, particularly after perhaps Iran and places like this. People want to see it for themselves. They want to know, is this the real story? Or are we just being told, again, just the black and the white? Sure. They want to fill in the other tones.
Who is your main clientele?
A lot of European. Before it was American, they were the sort of second largest. Now is Canadians and Australians, and a few ex sort of socialist countries now coming back, and Taiwanese. But the biggest market is, we don't take them, but Chinese. Chinese tourism to North Korea is massive.
And what were some of the most interesting feedback that you've gotten after your tours? Tour around
the general thing, I think, is people come back with more questions than they went in with. We try and say to people, look, have an open mind, go in, you're going to go in obviously loaded with preconceptions, but definitely the people's attitude changes. It's not that they like North Korea and say, well, hey, we've never had anyone defect to North Korea. But we have had people say, it's nice to see the humanity, it's nice to see that it's not as regimented. But there are a lot more questions than when they started, which is interesting. So we get a lot of people coming back.
What is the most popular tour package that you have?
There's Pyongyang is fascinating as a total model city. So if you're interested in architecture, everything is Pyongyang. If you want to travel, then going up on the east coast, just going over to Wonsan, then up to Chongjin, and then even right up now, you can get the train up to Rajin, Rajin Sombong, and then out of the country into Russia, instead of going out the China route. So there's a lot there going on. Paektusan is,
beautiful.
Beautiful. I mean, it's the birthplace of the Korean people, so it's stunning. And perhaps more so, more recently, is Kumgangsan. There are areas that are just, it's unspoiled. That whole east coast is remarkable.
Sure.
There's no development apart from in Wonsan. It's just stunning.
So people go on hiking and they go skiing?
Yeah, we do
also?
hiking, bicycling, all sorts of stuff. That's what we push now, is that the travel people we work with are really helping us develop tourism, because you asked earlier about restrictions. The government wants you to see this, this and this, but we're bored of doing that. We want to push the envelope. So we now want to, we have homestays up on the East Coast.
Homestays?
We go camping. Yeah. I mean, it's in a little village up in Chilbo, but it's wonderful.
Still.
Yeah.
The fact that you can interact with everyday North Koreans.
That's all we want to do is interact. So we do a lot of friendship football matches, or we'll take a football with us on the trip. And Koreans, you throw a ball at them, they'll throw it back. Football is the #1 game there.
Sure. And what do you think, in your opinion, just personally, is the main attraction that North Korea has to offer?
For tourism at the moment, I mean, sadly, it's this idea that it's an enigma. People want to go because they know nothing about it, and there's certainly going to be an interesting story to tell their friends when they get back. Once they've been, I think it's this idea that it's a remarkable society. There's no doubt about that. Sort of an ethnographic sort of interest, but the beauty of the place, it's stunning. There's so much. There will be so much more. It's a country that really does have so much to offer. I mean, 80% mountainous. It's going to have. It's remarkable. So there's a lot to come. I think more to come.
Well, you said you give like an hour-long session on things that they have to keep in mind, the tourists, before they travel to North Korea. What does that involve?
The main thing is without some of it is just pure politeness of they prefer their country to be called an official name, etc. The other one is very sensible things like you do not ask certain questions about their leaders. Religion is a big thing. There's no proselytizing there. So once you get that out of the way, the rest of the stuff is trying to give people an idea of their culture, right down to how to handshake and what have you. But it's a lesson to say that when you go there, you will have fun. It'll be interesting, but it's not like going off to Spain and having a holiday like that. It's you have to be careful. You stay in the group, and you have to be relatively careful with what you say and ask. But having said that, there's an enormous amount of freedom, and you can ask about the political system. You can ask, what happens if someone crosses the line and robs someone. What's the treatment there? Right. So you get far more openings than you would think you would have.
Because I have taken tours to Mount Kumgang as a journalist. But I did feel a lot of tension just between the people operating tours, the Hyundai Asan, and the folks who are traveling, because they do have that urge to ask and to...
Yeah, well, I mean, we know how disastrous that ended. I mean, that was so sad.
True.
And I think it was very controlled because also you were South Korean. We're in North Korea, you're Westerners. You're sort of it's to a lesser degree.
I see.
But there's always going to be people asking questions about the political system and do you believe in this system, etc. And you will get a standard answer that every guide will have learned by rote that this is our system. Thank you. But if you ask someone how did they meet their wife, then you'll actually get into their personality, or what do you do on Sundays for fun, and then you'll start really understanding the culture far more than that sort of didactic response. And that's the trick. The trick really is to speak to people and on subjects that they can talk about, and then it's amazing. The world really opens up.
Interesting. Share with us the side of North Korea that you've come to know and love that most people don't know and will never know.
I mean, I suppose, I feel very safe there. I feel I've got friends there that we've worked on projects with. The reason that we've achieved such a lot is purely because of our North Korean colleagues who've gone out of their way in very difficult circumstances to push for us, whether making a film or opening up a new travel site or what have you. I mean, they have a vested interest, but at the same time, there is that genuine, we want to help you. This is my profession. This is what I do. I want to do that. And the more we do it, the more you realize, the obvious old adage that they're just like us. There's no difference. It's a totally different political system, but personality-wise, no, you just get on well with people. So the thing that I love is the people. The people I work with, they're remarkable individuals. And you know, there's so much potential there in that country.
Right. And you're one of the few people who's ever worked so closely with the North Koreans as well as some South Koreans now that you're here as well. Do you see some similar traits, if you will?
Yeah, totally. Totally. I mean, as regards personality, yeah, absolutely. I've got to be very careful here because I get hit by both sides. But you're Korean. I mean, that's simple. I mean, you can't divide a country. You know, it's only since 1945, so it's a long time, but it's not impossible. And it certainly hasn't erased the similarities. So.
But when you have such different political systems and you've been separated for such decades now, do you think, I mean, just because you're of the same nationality, you get similar traits?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, humor and the way things are done, family brought up. Yeah, I think it's very similar. Actually, I don't think there's not such a lot of difference. Politically wise, there's a massive gap. Right. So I suppose, you know, what you do is you start talking, and that's hopefully what, you know, this is a better situation now than it was a year ago. And I did experience, you know, under Kim Dae-jung, the actual incredible sort of sight of many, you know, Koreans coming from the south and being in Pyongyang, and they didn't find it that different. I think, you know, in the end, with a glass of soju, you're Korean. There's a big difference between, for example, Koreans and Chinese, but there's not, I feel that, but I don't find such a difference between being here in Seoul or being in Pyongyang. I think there's a great deal of similarities, and that will, you know, those similarities will increase with this idea of engagement. So I'm a believer in engagement. I don't think anything's going to work out very happily and we're going to have reunification in the next few years, but working towards something like that, some stability, that's got to be a good thing. Right.
North Korea is definitely opening up and gearing towards peace, I suppose. So with the recent developments, with the summits with the U.S. and South Korea as well, do you think these developments will eventually lead, hopefully for North Korea to eventually open up and join the international community?
I think it's for the country to open up. Yes, that will happen slowly. Between the North and South, it's a very different issue. I think North Korea, as its own country, as it sees a DPRK, yes, I think there will be changes there, providing sanctions are lifted, etc. And so the living standard of people will raise. But that's a very different question from sort of inter-Korean relations. But yeah, I think there is room for change.
You think it's easier for North Korea to open up to the international community than it is to really open the borders up to South Korea?
Oh yes, yeah, definitely.
Why do you think that is?
This is going to be a lot. This is quite an in-depth one. It's a question of time and trust. And two different cultures. I mean, in that way, you are very much two different countries. One is a socialist country, one is sort of democratic, sort of capitalist country. That's going to take an enormous amount of time. So I think the first thing is just have a conversation, and then we'll see where that goes. But it's never regular, New presidents up and down. So it's there isn't one direction from the south. So it's not just the north that's finding this difficult. There has to be some stability in relations. So yeah, I hope so. I've been there 25 years. I don't want that same situation to continue. It would be nice, and I'm sure a lot of sensible people would be the same. But it's a long journey.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you very much. Lovely. Thank you.
That was a lovely conversation I had with Mr. Nikolásbono, who operates tours to North Korea and who organized this very interesting exhibition. If you have a chance, you should definitely check it out. We'll be back next week. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.